Good morning. I've gotten up early to have a conversation with Bob Stutz at SAP in Germany. Let's welcome him aboard. He's Mr. CRM, Siebel, Microsoft, Salesforce, SAP for the second time. Bob, tell us a little more about yourself and your new role at SAP.
Great. Thanks, Vinnie, for having me. So I came back to SAP to sort of rebuild all the CX category of products again and to drive that. I have a long history in CRM going back to the early days with Siebel and then coming here to SAP back in the mid 2000s to rebuild their CRM product and the industries here at SAP, and then went on to Microsoft to rebuild their CRM, and then on to Salesforce to build out their marketing cloud and analytics. And I was actually on my way to retirement when an old friend, Jen Morgan, asked me to come and sort of help, figure out how to fix and sort of, get some life back into the CRM category in SAP. And before that, I spent 22 years in the military.
Bob, you're so calm. It's unbelievable. Every time I see you, I go, I want to be like Bob. But for most of us, 2020 will be quarantine. That'll be the big highlight for 2020, right? In your case, in addition, it's been a move across the Atlantic, and you mentioned Jen, you've had to endure a couple of big executive changes at SAP, and we're not even halfway through the year. So look ahead. When you look back at 2020, what will stand out?
Yeah, I think for me, if I think back to 2020 and I think about what will stand out for me is, yes, I think the COVID crisis in my lifetime, I've lived through quite a few crises, and I have to say that, at 64 years of age, this was probably the one that I think really, made me realize that the world is on an unhealthy path, and that there needs to be radical change around the environment, around, how countries interact with each other. And I think, and even every country needing to self-explore about, is it wise to offshore all your manufacturing outside of your own borders, right? And I think for me, if I look back on 2020, it's going to be about the fact that I think the world came to an awakening in a lot of different areas, and I think it's going to show. I think once we get through this year and go into 21, I think it will be a very different world going forward.
Well, hopefully we will learn and make it positive, right? You're right. It's just amazing how much has changed in 2 or 3 months. But, let's look at the positive side. We've seen a lot of heroics and acrobatics, right? Car manufacturers trying to make medical ventilators, people quadrupling PPE, mask production, healthcare heroics, banks processing 4 million loans in a month. I mean, just the scales are just unbelievable, right? I talked to Peter Meyer, your colleague, about operational heroics he's seen at SAP customers. Tell us about some of the customer-facing heroics you've seen.
Yeah, I think, if you look at sort of customers and what they're doing and what they're having to deal with, right? I think a lot of customers, having to change their business model, having to figure out how to re-engage with their customers in a whole nother way, which, I think, I do have to say, I think it took the bulk of the business community by surprise that, you do need to have an alternate way to communicate with your customers, to sell your goods and services, even if you're a B2B company. And I think one of the things I've seen is in some companies, there's the heroic acts, right, of companies that have taken distilleries and turned them into producing hand sanitizer and but I think it's, you know, for me, it's it's the unsung ones that, you know, people talk about those ones they talk about, but I talk about the supermarket chains of the world who in this horrible time period have stayed up and running, right? In some cases moved to a pure e-commerce model where e-commerce became a very substantial part of their business. You know, we have a commerce product, and that commerce product has a 561 billion GMV. That's bigger than Amazon. That's bigger than anybody else out there.
Wow.
And I can tell you, over the last few months, every day has been like Black Friday.
Wow.
And these customers, especially you know, when I look at the supermarket chains and the suppliers that are providing food and things like that, it's pretty amazing. You know, they even in the crisis, they've had to operate 24/7 and even go above and beyond, right? And I really do look at the supermarket chains because it's a very interesting thing, right? Because these are companies that are used to working under, like, you know, they're open the set hours, you know, but all of a sudden these became a lifeline for people, right? You know, going to the grocery store, which used to be a very uneventful thing, became a massive sort of thing, right? Having to wear a mask, having to stand in line to get in the door, walking in and seeing empty shelves, right? It reminded me of, and I hate to bring it back to that, but it reminded me of the Cold War era, when you went into Eastern Europe and you went into Russia or one of the you know, East Germany or the Czech Republic, and you went into a store and there was nothing on the shelves, right? I mean, but you know, the grocery stores and the people who run them and work in them, I have to say, for me, that was amazing. And the fact that they, you know, and we worked hand in hand with lots of large ones to keep their stuff up and running. I mean, the amount of merchandise that has moved through e-commerce systems over the last few months is just totally unbelievable.
Yeah, and the last mile logistics they've had to handle, the drive-through. I mean that you know, the fascinating thing through all this is pop-up clinics, drive-through traffic, like you say, contactless deliveries, new ways of getting to the customer, or the customer getting to you, have been phenomenal, right? Hopefully we'll keep building on that. Are you seeing from all the, you know, all these different ways of approaching the customer, is that showing up in feature requests to SAP? Or is it,
I would say, yeah, I mean, look, it is showing up in feature requests, but it's also showing up in, you know, and I think, you know, CRM in general has had a bad rep for many years, right? You know, the promise of CRM and, you know, the lack of what I would call, you know, customers really implementing it right, you know, has always been a huge issue in the CRM space. And I do think this time, I think the one thing I see is that there is a resurgence in CRM again. I think that people realize that, you know, it is a very important part, and especially when you have omni-channel CRM, right? The ability to communicate through multiple channels, right? Not just email, but you have to be able to communicate through multiple things, right? And even in this case, I think a very valuable lesson was that, you know, people still want somebody to pick up the phone and call them. And I think, you know, this time period during the COVID crisis, I think, you know, was one of those things where I think especially consumers appreciate when somebody picks up the phone and calls them, and instead of just bombarding them with emails and SMS and texts and in-app notifications. But I do think, in a crisis like this, the importance of having a CRM system is absolutely critical, and truly one that's omni-channel, and the ability to deliver and communicate with your customers in any channel, I think is is absolutely critical. And the companies who I think have come through this and done a really great job are those companies who really have invested it in over the years and really took the time to think about, how do I communicate with my customers and my consumers if my stores are closed, if I'm not able to, right? And I think, I have to say, there's not a lot of those, actually, to be quite honest. But I think some of the ones I've seen during this crisis has been pretty tremendous.
Well, it's not just, like you say, omni-channel, right? So I was talking to a healthcare executive yesterday. He was like, Vinnie, UC San Francisco has seen outpatient visits. It used to be 2% telemedicine. During the crisis, it's gone up to 50%, right? So that's going the other way, which is good. Give people a choice. He said, it looks like it's only benefiting the healthcare system, but look at yourself as a patient. If you can get something done in 10 minutes versus spending 3 hours getting to the doctor and filling out paperwork and so on, you're benefiting too. So you're right. Different ways of pleasing the customer, digital, physical. We are exploring all of them. That is healthy. Let's talk about on-premise versus cloud. I've talked to a lot of CIOs who said, with the work from home, the cloud clearly was easier to work with. They didn't have to worry about VPN, tunneling, and so on. Do you think this is going to push cloud more? I know Europe has been a little bit more reluctant to adopt the cloud. Are you seeing any kind of change from this?
Yeah, and I would say that's the big one. I think, a crisis like this, I think it showed that the cloud is more than just a phenomena or a phase. I think it showed that, in a time where, people have to work from home, people have to shop from home, people have to, it was critical. And I think, those companies that were early adopters and who continue to push everything to the cloud have weathered through this pretty well, because of the fact that they were able to, their people didn't have to come into an office. They could work from home. They could, do business as usual from home. And I do think the cloud, I think once and for all, the argument around on-prem versus cloud, I think this crisis proved that the cloud is the wave of the future, and it is what companies will definitely have to go to.
Do you think they'll have the money to make the migration? Because that's the other issue, is we're probably facing a tough financial situation, right?
Yeah, and I think that is that is a big piece, right? Because I think companies are going to have a hard time with anything that's going to take more than a couple months to do, right? I think what you'll see is large projects will start to decline, right? And it will behoove, every software vendor out there to be able to get their stuff and have it implemented quick and fast and easy, and not have implementations that drag on for, 12, 18, 24 months, right?
And not require school buses, right? Do a lot of it.
And not require school buses. That's right.
Yeah. Bob, I'm on my business school dean's advisory board. And, we had an advisory meeting a couple of weeks ago. I forgot to ask him. I said, Dean, you taught me a lot of things, but you never taught me about dealing with a crisis this deep and this wide, right? You're always so calm. Where do you get your inspiration? And where do Christian Adair, your leadership, where do they get their inspiration to lead in something this deep? Is it spirituality? Is it family? Is it, what? Share some of your secrets.
Yeah, I mean, I can't talk for other people, but for me, 22 years in the military sort of, taught me how to deal with any crisis, right? And I think, the good thing about crises like this, nobody's shooting at you at the end of the day, right? Which I think is a big difference, right? But no, look, in a crisis like this, you have to stay calm. You have to, be able to look, you have to have peripheral vision in a crisis, right? You can't have tunnel vision. You really do have to have peripheral vision, and part of it is staying calm. And I do, about a couple of years ago, my dear friend Mark Vinnie really introduced me to the art of meditation, and I meditate every day. I think it's a great way to just clear your mind and to think and look at things in a very different way, right? And I think in a crisis, you have to act quickly, but you also have to think very differently, right? And the ability to do that means that your mind has to be totally clear to be able to do that. You have to take all the inertia and take it out of there. You have to be able to, to think of how you would do it differently, right? Not the way you did it in the past, but how you would do it differently, right? The old term of, looking at everything through a child's eyes, right? And how would a child handle, and I'm a big believer in that. But I do have to say, 22 years in the military, you sort of do get trained to handle any type of crisis and be able to go through it. And I think the one most important thing for me in a crisis like this is you've really got to make sure you take care of your people, because people suffer in a crisis like this. All of a sudden people are having to work from home, right? You may not have the ideal living situation to work from home. You may not have the best internet connection to work from home. And, and I think one of the things we've done really well is give our people really maximum flexibility and allowing them to really, we've tried to really, cut out a lot of meetings, cut out, a lot of inertia out of the day-to-day stuff, so that people have more time in their schedule, more flexibility, to deal with those things at home that are really critical, right? And it isn't a pretty hard thing, right? When you have a couple of kids at home and you have to homeschool, and it's not easy. I can't even imagine what it would be like to homeschool, 2 children, 3 children in an environment like that, plus, have to work at the same time. So we've tried to give everybody maximum flexibility, and it's worked, I have to say. People continue to produce, continue to,
I'm so proud of you, Bob. Thank you for sharing that. Let's talk about the economy. Germany seems to be in better shape than the rest of EU, but what do you see for the global economy? Do you see a sharp rebound after all the money we're pouring in, printing money everywhere? Do you see a gradual U recovery? Do you see a W, kind of inconsistent with flare-ups and so on? Or do you see an L? It's going to be a long, slow recovery.
I actually think it's going to be an up and down recovery. I think we're going to see periods where all of a sudden the recovery shoots up. And then I think, the unpredictability about the COVID crisis, and are we really out of it, right? I don't believe we are. And I actually believe it's a false sense of security in some ways, right? And, and time will tell, but I think until the COVID crisis, we get to a point where we really understand the ramifications and what the effect is on people and working and the long-term consequences of that. I do think it will be a very up and down type of recovery. I don't think we'll have, I don't think it will be a long, slow recovery, but I think it will be a very up and down recovery.
Well, any final thoughts, Bob? You have so much wisdom. And like you say, part of that comes from Mark. When you said, look at it from a child's perspective. That's partly his Buddhist orientation, right? So anything else?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, my advice to people is look, you just take it one day at a time and you make the most of it in that day, because I think long-term planning right now is not something that you can do and do it effectively. I think planning cycles have to be done in very short spurts nowadays.
Yeah, agility trumps perfectness, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Bob, thank you so much. Stay safe, stay healthy. I look forward to seeing you in person one of these days, if they'll ever let us fly again. Thank you.
Thanks, Vinny. Appreciate it.